Hi, my name is Jen Scott Mobley, and I am the co-coordinator for the Jane Chambers Feminist Playwriting Award, sponsored by the Women in Theater Program and the Association for Theater and Higher Education, ATHA. And today I am here with Pauline David Sax to celebrate her award-winning play this year, 2020. The play is called How We Survived. And I'd like to ask Pauline a few questions about the play, starting with a basic one, which was, what was your inspiration for the play?
So I'm going to start with a disclaimer that no characters in the play are meant to be exact representations of people in real life. And I'm very appreciative to my family for believing me when I say that, because it's true. But the book was inspired by, the play was inspired by a book that my grandmother wrote. And this is the book. She self-published it. It's called How We Survived, Chronicles of Our Family. And she started writing this book in her 70s. She self-published it in her 80s. She took continuing ed classes at Hunter College in order to learn the craft of writing and write it. And, when this book came out, I felt like I knew a bunch of what she was going to write about. It's the story of her family of German Jews leaving Germany in 1938 and coming to the United States. She actually goes back several generations, and then she traces it forward through to her children, including my dad. And there were a lot of pieces of it that I sort of knew about. One of the pieces I did know is where she ends the book, which is with my grandfather's suicide in the 1950s in Brooklyn. But what I didn't know, what I was really surprised by, was how many suicides were in this book and how much death was in this book. And I was sort of taken aback. How can you take a book that's about all of this death, especially suicide, and call it How We Survived? And there's this Yiddish term, chutzpah, sort of audacity, right? And I sort of thought, that's sort of chutzpahdik, how are you going to call this How We Survived? This is not a survival story. And yet, the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was a survival story. The fact that she was able to tell this story was her survival. And it was trying to understand that made me really want to write this play and sort of explore that perspective on what it means to survive.
Wow, what a legacy. Your grandma's a badass. I mean, to go back to school and take courses and put together and self-publish, I'm totally impressed with her.
Yeah.
Again,
and a big gift to us to have this written down.
What a legacy, what a role model, feminist role model. I love it.
Yeah.
So how, and you might want to go into a little bit of how you came to playwriting, if that feels appropriate. But how does your play, or does this particular play, intersect with your other work?
So I think I've always been a writer who's interested in different perspectives, undertold or lesser told stories. I get inspiration from real life and things that I just don't really fully understand. And those are the questions that sort of drive me to write. I was a middle school educator for a long time, and when I was a middle school humanities teacher, I would post on the wall questions I wanted my students to think about when we were reading historical texts. And they were whose story is being told and whose story is being left out. And we would talk about, what do you do, right? And what do you have to do when you read something and you start to realize that there are stories that are missing? Well, you need to go and you need to do research and you need to fill in the gaps, or attempt to, at least. And so I think that's sort of how I approach writing. Is I get these questions about something that I read and a piece of it that I just can't quite understand, or a perspective that seems like it hasn't been fully excavated. I do a lot of research, and then at some point I ultimately decide, what, the research is insufficient. I need to take sort of an imaginative leap of faith in order to construct this perspective. And I think that's why when I first started writing this play, I thought it would be much more biographical about my actual grandmother and my actual family. And I found that actually, to tell the truth of the story, I had to let myself let go of all of the facts of the biography. And that's been true in most of the plays that I've written. My first play was inspired by Georgia O'Keeffe. I was reading biographies of her, and she used to go in the summers. She was married to Alfred Stieglitz, and he had a lake house at Lake George. and they would invite Paul Strand, the photographer, and his first wife, Beck Strand. And I was reading about this, and I was thinking, what was this like? Beck Strand at the time was a medical secretary. And I thought, what was that like to spend summers with three ambitious, talented visual artists? And I just became fascinated with that. And I couldn't find out that much about Beck Strand.
Not surprising.
Although she did actually end up becoming an acclaimed folk artist later in her life, which is also this super cool story. But so I ended up, trying to figure out what might that have been like. And then I wrote a play that was both about them, but not, because I had to use my imagination.
Wow, excellent. You're clearly drawn to strong women and those invisible women's stories, or those people left sort of in the margins that we don't animate often in our history books and our storytelling. And as I mentioned in the award ceremony, one of the strengths of this play, I think, is the opportunity for performers, but it's so refreshing to see the intergenerational strong women just being themselves and sort of living their lives. It's really, you wouldn't think it would be that rare to see in playwriting in 2020, and yet I still see it as sort of magical and something I'd like to see more of. So I'm glad to see it in this work in any case. So my next question, how do you see your play interacting with feminist themes or concerns in the theater world? Or it could be the world at large.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think, there's this idea of telling undertold stories. Obviously, that can mean lots of different things and should mean lots of different things. Right? There are lots of undertold stories. There are Black untold stories and queer untold stories, and all of these. But for my personal identity as a white woman, I think women's stories are sort of the way I find entry into telling untold stories and undertold stories. And then I think something else that has found its way into all of my plays, although it's one of those things that sort of snuck up in all of them, is I started writing plays right after I gave birth to my younger daughter. And I have noticed that in all of my plays, there is a character who is sort of struggling with or thinking about what does it mean to identify as a woman, where the choice about whether or not to have children is both important but doesn't centrally define you. So I think that's something that sort of bubbles up in all of my work.
Do you identify, and obviously we feel the play fulfill, the judges, the Jane Chambers panel saw this play as feminist, but would you identify as a feminist playwright per se?
That's such a tricky question.
You don't have to, I don't need to trap you.
I mean, I would identify as a feminist. I think, I don't know. I was incredibly moved to win this award and to have this play recognized as a feminist play. And I think when you said, that my grandmother was a badass, I feel like the character makes it a feminist play, right?
Yeah.
So I guess in the sense that I'm drawn to characters who are strongly feminist, then I guess, sure. I don't know.
I know, and a lot of, again, that label I think is too tight a fit for some people. So I was just curious to see how you landed with it, and I don't mean to box you in at all.
Yeah.
And that the contest view of it is very pluralistic, and sort of we see definitely feminisms, and I think what is really fresh about this play comes through these incredible characters that you've found. So I was just curious where you if you identified, how you identified in that regard. Okay. So we sort of referenced this a little bit earlier, but I'd like to dig into a little bit more. So if you could change one thing about the field of theater, playwriting, you can take that question however you want. What would it be?
So the caveat is I've only been in this field for a few years. So I don't assume that I have a very full understanding of what needs changing, but I have been trying to do some learning about anti-racist theater. I'm partway through a 2-part series workshop with Nicole Brewer, and learning a ton, and that's amazing. And so, I mean, my sense is that that's what really needs to change. And I think it dovetails with this idea of telling untold, underrepresented stories, is to make theater anti-racist, to make the institutions commit to being anti-racist. And I also think that there's an economic component to that. You know, people need to be able to make a living as artists, and we need to be able to invite all people into that and make it viable for them to do the work. If we want to hear all those stories, people need to be able to.
We've got to restructure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would add just a fun, I feel like your play, particularly in featuring the Freda character and Rosalie, because she's a more mature woman, answers or responds to a previous winner who said one of the things that she was feeling was the absence of women of a certain age, both as playwrights and then also as characters, and which of course I completely agree with. And I love that this play actually addresses that. But certainly the energy of this moment, I'm optimistic that we are all poised to make real changes to create an anti-racist field overall. So yeah, that's where the energy is for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, and whose work excites you? Doesn't have to be a playwright, could be.
So when I first started, when I got the idea for my first play, it was the first play I ever wrote, and I knew I wanted to write a play. I knew I had to learn about writing plays, and in the first class I took, 2 of the plays that I read really have stuck with me. It was Top Girls by Carol Churchill and The Clean House by Sarah Rule.
Wow.
And I just love those plays. I unfortunately only ever read them. I haven't gotten a chance to see them. I would love that. But just, I think the melding of form and content really really made a big impact on me. So that's one piece of it. I had the opportunity this past year to intern at Tectonic Theater Project. And so I've been studying moment work, and that has had a big impact on me to really think about what else besides the written word can I think about, even from the first draft of a play, in terms of incorporating all these different theatrical elements. And then there's a play that I got the chance to see, which had made such a huge impression on me, which was Mary C. Cole by Jackie Sibley's Drury, which was at Lincoln Center a few years ago. And that play was unbelievable. It's a historical play, so I felt, you know, connected to it in that regard. It's about Mary C. Cole, who was a Jamaican woman who, a medical practitioner who went to help to treat British soldiers in the Crimean War. And it's also a play about Black women caring for white women. And it goes through time, and it goes through geography, and it's this all-female cast. And then there's this one point when she's at the battlefield, and all of a sudden from above the stage, all of these male mannequins rain down on the stage. It blew my mind. And it also, I think I almost didn't realize until then that it was a play that only had women on stage, which based on what it's about, of course, made perfect sense. But that moment of being like, oh, here are all these live women and all these mannequin men, and that was just,
wow.
It was spectacular. The whole play was just totally spectacular. So, I mean, when I think about how impactful a piece of historical fiction a play can be, I really think about that play. It really moved me.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't see that. That sounds amazing. I'm gonna have to look into that one. Maybe they have it recorded at Lincoln Center.
Yeah.
Wow. Anybody else?
think those are the main things. I mean, I'm still, at being relatively new. I just sort of read whatever I can get my hands on. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
yeah.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk with us, the proverbial us that is. I'm so excited for this play to go out and live in the world, and so proud that Jane Chambers is going to be able to champion it for the coming year. So congratulations again.
Thank you so much.
And thank you.